Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Angelo Stracquatanio, the co-founder and CEO of Apprentice.
I'm Angelo Stracquatanio, co-founder and CEO of Apprentice. We built out an intelligent manufacturing system for life sciences, which, as you can imagine, during the pandemic has been quite an important piece of software to help these organizations get therapeutics to market faster. It's kind of been our whole bend and our whole approach for a long time. And this journey with Apprentice has not been short. I'm in my 8th year now with Apprentice, and it's been quite a road. Yes, the last 18 to 20 months, which we'll share a little bit more as we get into the conversation today about the journey we've been through. But my entrepreneurial journey, as is on my side, has not been straight up and to the right. I have a board member of mine, his name is Mike Dodd from Silverton, that said this phrase to me very early on when we started working together: nothing is up and to the right. Nothing goes in a nice straight hockey stick line. And I think for better or for worse, that's been my ride to date, because for the first 4 years of Apprentice, 4 years, like, just to put that in perspective, like, people get entire college degrees in that period of time. It was just myself and my co-founder, and being out there in the wilderness, just trying to get in the front door of our customers and build trust was quite a challenge. But interestingly, my journey traces even further back to college. I had three failed startups before Apprentice. I started my career in finance. I went to school for finance, and I thought I'd be working on Wall Street. Growing up as a Jersey kid, you grow up across the river from Manhattan, and it's like, hey, this is what I should be doing. This is what I could be doing. And so I went to school for finance, graduated right into the financial crisis, and I was an intern at Lehman Brothers. Yeah, the Lehman. So imagine, graduating 2008, being an intern at Lehman in sales and trading, and then all of a sudden the world changes. And so I was, let's say, forced to take a job at a different organization. But at that organization, which funny enough was a New Jersey company, Lord Abbott in Jersey City. I can see them from my office now, which is quite honestly a cool experience. But when I was there, they needed someone to help write some code in Excel and Word and Access and these types of systems. And I was like, maybe I'll learn something. And so I taught myself some basic programming all those years ago, but I fell in love. I unequivocally fell in love with writing code, and I decided to make a career out of it. So I taught myself a whole bunch of new languages, and that's when I started my first failed startup. And so my entrepreneurial journey started pretty soon after college in like 2000, and I graduated in 2008. I started the first startup in 2009, so just really a year later, where I taught myself how to write some code. And it's interesting that that startup was called My Errands Online. Think of it like Postmates before Postmates was cool. The only problem was, besides building the software like Postmates, I was the one going to the grocery store. I was the one picking out cucumbers. I was the one picking out laundry, because I didn't have anyone else. I didn't have any capital. I was a poor kid just out of college, and like, I was doing everything at the same time. And I think that was a key learning on my entrepreneurial journey, that maybe I have to find something that can be a little bit of a blend, and maybe just more software versus going outside in the world and doing things. So from there, I started to really build a career in software engineering. And I took that learning, I didn't raise any money. I used all of my capital. So I like to say that I failed with, my own dime. But those learnings then translated to the next part of my career around software engineering. So I went from finance to software engineering, went back to school for it as well, but started to build this career around mobile development, because this is like 2009, 2010 now. All of us didn't have smartphones. My mom, held out for quite a while before she got a smartphone. And that part of my journey was really interesting, because since mobile was so new, I was focusing specifically on mobile development for the enterprise. So I built one of the first ever clinical trial apps on an iPad. I built one of the first financial applications on an iPad, and it was very early. Like the iPad and these types of devices had just come out. And so I think I had some early learnings around how mobile devices, mobile solutions are used in the context of an enterprise. I've always focused on the enterprise and gravitated towards them. Maybe it's due to my finance background, but I've always kind of liked those types of applications because they just seem to make sense to me a little bit. But it was through those learnings in the very early days of the first iPad, which I don't know if you guys remember, it was much thicker than it is now. It was a big honking, I still have it, by the way, it's big honking, paperweight, let's call it. But I used those learnings to then progress into my next two startups, which again, I don't call them failures, I call them learnings. And the first one was building mobile apps for small businesses that would allow them to have, restaurants and personal trainers and these types of folks to have their own branded mobile applications. So as the world was shifting from the web to mobile, they can build on and have the tools that the big enterprises had, but now they can have it in their local, mom and pop shop. Some of the learnings there, unfortunately, were that, small business doesn't have a very high contract value. And so I was doing a ton of work for $29.99 a month. And that, takes a lot of $29.99 a month to feed yourself. And so then I moved from there into my next learning before Apprentice. And this was right before Apprentice now, using similar tech, but for schools. So creating a way where schools can communicate with their students safely in a way that was transparent with audit trails and all this fun stuff. Again, this is years ago now. This is like 2011, 2012, almost a decade ago. So it's, in hindsight, it looks like very obvious, but at the time, schools were just getting up to speed on a lot of this mobile tech. And learning there, schools also don't always have the largest budgets in the world to, again, feed myself. So I'm like, hey, wait a second. Like, I really need to at some point feed myself here. I got to get off the ramen noodle diet. And so, a couple of years after that, I just got lucky and I met my wife. We were dating at the time. I met with my wife, and she comes from life sciences. She was running one of the largest biomanufacturing facilities out here in New Jersey, in Branchburg, New Jersey, where she was manufacturing a cancer therapeutic. Fun fact, she went on to then later ship the first ever COVID therapeutic, even before Regeneron and all the vaccines. The first ever thing to help fight this pandemic was a batch that she manufactured, that she shipped. So when I was talking to her back in now 2014, 2013, like 8+ years ago, we were talking about how they were using a 200-page paper binder to help manufacture what I thought at the time was one of the most sophisticated molecules on planet Earth. And it was shocking to me as an engineer. I was like, how is this possible using paper to go through this super complex process, capture this complex data, and make decisions in a way that wasn't using technology, software. And so a bit naively, I decided I think I could go solve this thing. And that's when I started Apprentice all those years ago now, but always built around mobility, mobile tech, mobile devices, and one step further now, using head-worn devices. I don't have a head-worn device now, it's my glasses, but using head-worn devices, I have one here that we ended up using many years later, to provide ergonomic solutions to the space because they work with their two hands. And so because I knew mobility so well, because I knew enterprise so well, it just ended up becoming quite natural. But the hardest part about it was that I had no credibility, no one trusted me, and it took close to 4 years to really get on the inside of these companies, build out the first couple of versions of the product, and then ultimately help grow it and scale it to where we are today. So it's been quite a journey, Jim. There's a lot of learnings in there. You could call it failures, but let's call it learnings. We'll be polite. Before I got to Apprentice, and even when I got to Apprentice, for 4 years, I was out in the wilderness before we raised our first round of financing in late 2017 into 2018, our seed round. And then it started to jump up from there.
And we'll get back into that. That was fascinating. I didn't even realize all those entrepreneurial efforts beforehand.
Learnings.
Now, tell us about the technology. If just people think of obviously Oculus and things like that, and Google Glass. Tell us sort of the applications you guys run and how you leverage this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's also interesting too is even though we started using these emerging tech devices, emerging tech techniques around augmented reality, virtual reality, et cetera, later on in our journey, I realized we couldn't just have something that was cool and we were using this emerging tech. We ended up building a much bigger, broader system called a manufacturing execution system that augmented reality then became just a part of the platform. Instead, when I started the company, it was kind of the whole platform. But to explain more about what this thing is, what it does, and why life sciences has gravitated in the way that they have over the last, especially the last 18 to 20 months. For those of the folks that are listening in that don't know much about life sciences, I'm sure all of us now are experts in how a vaccine comes to market because we were sitting at home for almost 2 years, and the thing that finally got us outside again was life sciences, pharma, and it's my customers, and it's this industry that worked around the clock, 7 days a week till insane hours throughout the day to solve this pandemic with the pandemic going on around them. My wife included was trying to fight COVID with COVID around her, and it was one of these incredible things that not many people know about. Interestingly, they hear about the discovery phase of these vaccines, but not many people know about the manufacturing phase of all of this. And so we focus specifically on manufacturing because not only is it incredibly critical to get drugs to patients, because if you don't make it, a patient can't take it. But beyond all of that, the types of therapies that are being developed nowadays are moving from mostly pill-based therapies, which are classified as small molecule drugs. Like you get sick, you go to a doctor, you take a pill, right? Like all of us are familiar with this pattern. But in the last decade and a half, has been the big rise of biologics. These are your cancer drugs, your diabetes drugs, your Alzheimer's drugs, and the COVID vaccine, where these drugs, when they're made, when most people think of pharma, they think of like a pharmacist that's taking some powder, pressing into a pill, and then putting it into a bottle. Biologics are very different. These drugs are grown, and they're grown over time. Think of like beer making. You get these giant stainless steel tanks where instead of the yeast fermenting over time and creating your favorite IPA, instead these are mammalian cells, CHO cells, all types of these other types of starter cells that then multiply over time and eventually express a protein. The protein's an antibody, and that antibody gets injected into your arm to go fight back against whatever ails you as a patient. But that manufacturing, just like the COVID vaccine, is wildly complex. It takes up to 4 months of time, huge human effort, tons of things that go into it. But more than that too, now we're moving towards personalized medicine, where there's a specific batch of drugs made for me and a specific batch of drugs made for you with our DNA, our white blood cells. And there's these new techniques like CRISPR, which for those of you that aren't familiar with this, that are listening in, for the first time in human history, we have the power to edit our own genes, which through this tool, this technique, this isn't about treating disease any longer. You can actually remove the mutation from your body and cure disease. So the next 10 years, these drugs are going to look very, very different. But the takeaway here is that in a short period of time, drugs went from taking pills when you go to a doctor to injectables that are going into your arm to now personalized medicine, where they're actually editing your own genes in a manufacturing facility like in Warren, New Jersey, a couple of blocks down from us, one of our customers here. But the manufacturing, again, has become wildly complicated. And so what we've done is we've built out a piece of software called the Manufacturing Execution System. And the Manufacturing Execution System is a piece of software that controls and manages the process from end to end to make those drugs and ultimately get them out to market. When most people think of manufacturing, they think of like Tesla. They think of a bunch of robots, stamping out a bunch of doors and Model 3 getting out to you. Not in our world. It is highly manual, highly complex, and you have PhD level, master's degree level folks like my wife that are on the shop floor. So the tools that they need in order to manufacture these therapeutics for billions of patients around the world is unbelievably critical. And that's where then we've built out this end-to-end system that happens to include augmented reality, happens to include hands-free devices. But I learned quite painfully that we had to do the hard thing, because for those 4 years where I was out in the wilderness, one of the things I learned was that augmented reality was a nice to have. Virtual reality was a nice to have. Headsets were nice to haves, but we need to build the need to have backbone, mission critical piece of software to help make drugs. And that's when then we start to build the MES, which then includes all these new emerging tech components and techniques and all this kind of cool stuff. But the takeaway is that we really had to do this crazy thing, which is to build this complex system in order to unlock product market fit. That was the thing that finally unlocked it for us many years later. But that's how we incorporate, new tech to solve some really big challenges for a pretty critical industry that we've all now, been recipients of during this pandemic.
Right. And so I guess the reality is, and people don't realize this, is maybe that augmented reality, virtual reality is really helping business enterprise customers. We just don't see it, right? So it's really fundamentally sort of one of the best use cases for it, correct?
I really believe that to my core. And fun fact, we've shipped probably the most number of headsets of any company ever. And we're doing so in life sciences in a very opaque world that people don't get to see. It's really interesting too. During the pandemic, we heard about how this drug was being made, but not many people saw how it was actually made. So it's hard to sometimes conceptualize the process that our customers go through. But the takeaway though is that you're not wearing a headset on your couch right now. Maybe you are. Hey, listen, maybe you're using it for PlayStation, doing some VR stuff. Cool, good for you. But it's not common enough in the consumer realm, but it is in the enterprise. And in the enterprise, there's just a reality to having to work hands-free. I'm using my two hands to manipulate equipment, capture data, work in a very difficult and harsh environment. And a headset is perfectly tailored, perfectly suited for that type of ergonomic use case. So I think there's huge value in it, but yeah, it's fascinating. Like a lot of it's behind closed doors and facilities with big giant stainless steel tanks and in a very foreign environment for many, consumers out there. But it's still being deployed, pretty big scale.
That's really amazing. And can you show the headset again?
Yeah, so this is one of the devices that we use. It's called the RealWear HMT. And how it works is you wear it like this. And remember, my customers wear head to toe gowns during the day, head coverings, safety glasses, masks. Looks like a hazmat suit. So even though it looks bulky when you're looking at me, when you're wearing it, you just see a small screen at the corner of your eye, and it's all voice driven. This is another thing that finally unlocked product market fit for us, which is you talk to it, it talks back to you. And think of it like Google Maps for pharma, where it can guide you through your process hands-free, capture all the data that you need, and ultimately help you execute your process not only more effectively, but also faster.
Yeah, that's great. And so let's jump back into sort of funding and the pandemic, which it's really enlightening to know you've made such an impact. As you recall, we honored sort of innovators. We should have maybe considered you guys as one of those key companies behind the scenes that help save the world in many ways. So let's talk about how your company scaled during the pandemic. We hear about the Amazons of the world and other tech companies doing well. But tell us, what the journey was like.
So I'll start with some of the headline numbers and then I'll work back and tell the story around it because the numbers are only part of it. And what's really fascinating is going into the pandemic, we're a pretty small company. We're 18 people, 18 going into the pandemic just about 2 years ago now. Now we're over 200. Not only that, we raised 3 rounds of financing during the pandemic where it culminated with my $100 million Series C that we just completed a couple months back for a total amount of funding, about $140 million. My revenue since the beginning of the pandemic is up 12x. But more than that, the biggest thing that we took out of this whole thing was the trust and credibility that we built with our customers. Because yes, we did help them directly with both not only the COVID vaccine, but helping them steady the global drug supply chains during the worst thing to impact this industry in the 100+ years of its existence. And so it's really fascinating because just before the pandemic, to now tell the story of how we got there, how we managed growth, the growth that we went through, and the funding that came with it. Just before the pandemic, like I said, we were a pretty small company, but we had just embarked on building that bigger, broader system that I talked about. So it was like 4 years in the wilderness, just trying to get the inside of the company, raised 2.5 million from 2017 into 2018, and started to build out this MES platform, which then we launched the first version of it really at the tail end of 2019, right before the pandemic. But then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, the industry needed to solve some pretty big challenges almost immediately because they couldn't travel either. I think a lot of people may take for granted just how difficult this whole process was, where, again, they were trying to solve COVID with COVID around them. They dealt with the same restrictions we all dealt with, and they needed technology to help support them, again, not just on the vaccine, but on pretty much everything. This whole industry had to figure out, how do we make sure that the supply chains are not disrupted to ensure that the right therapies are getting to patients that are life-saving, no matter where they are in the world. And so we just happened to kind of be in a fortunate position where then in February of 2020, we took a gamble, pretty big gamble, to retool our software, because previously we used to deploy all of it on site. We ourselves used to physically go to the customer, physically get there and help them get all of this up to speed and deploy everything in person. Well, we recognized we probably weren't going in person. So we retooled everything in February of 2020 to get ready for this thing that we didn't even know was possibly coming. And then it came. And what's interesting about our platform is not only does it have the whole drug making thing built in, but on top of that, we have this augmented reality remote collaboration tool, which allows organizations and people to put on that headset, share what they're looking in their field of view, and then have a subject matter expert back in their bedroom help guide and troubleshoot and point them through their process using augmented reality. So as you can imagine, this was a pretty big deal for organizations to be able to continue to collaborate, continue to execute, and continue to work on some of the most complex challenges that humanity has been faced with in a really long time. And so that's what then initially started to help us really accelerate our journey. The core platform continued to evolve over that year, but the biggest thing that we again took out of 2020 was that credibility. We finally had some credibility to be able to work with our customers at a bigger scale. And then you move that into 2021, and then my team is getting bigger now. I started to raise like 2 rounds of financing by that time. I hired a leadership team for the first time in our existence. Our team then started to grow, and we then all of a sudden had resourcing to help us execute against the mission. And my team, I want to give a really, really big shout out to my team, because there's no way, it's not me. Like, yes, I'm the face of this. I started it, whatever, but it's my team. They're the ones that had a window of opportunity that got opened, and they slipped through it. They're the ones that worked 7 days a week and to insane hours to help our customers deliver all of this and deploy all of this at scale. And they're the ones that have been the ones that have truly been the biggest shock and source of pride for me, because they're so built into this mission that we have to help our customers get therapeutics to market faster. And they are the ones that built and scaled this journey. I just had to make sure I steered the ship and didn't run off into a brick wall. But I've had a distinct privilege of working with some of the smartest people on planet Earth that we've hired, from the best tech companies on planet Earth, whether it's Apple or Uber or Facebook or Google, to some of the best life science organizations on planet Earth. And together, we've worked together to solve all of these things. So then in 2021, that's really where we start to kick things into high gear. We rebuilt our entire platform in 2021 and relaunched it all in a matter of 10 months, which is insane based on the sheer level of complexity. The complexity of this software is extreme. And that then allowed us to continue this growth and scale, which then ran headfirst into our $100 million Series C. And so it's been quite the journey, quite the ride during the pandemic. But the takeaway is that there was a window that opened up, sprinkle a little bit of lucky magic dust. But my team, they were the ones that really just were exceptional during all of this.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I'm so glad you're telling the story, because it's really fascinating. And so important to what we've just been through, right? I guess without your software, it probably would have taken longer, right? There would have been delays to get these treatments and vaccines out. Is that a fair statement?
They would have still got it done. And in many cases, we didn't work with every single vaccine in the market. And they did get it done. But for the ones that we did impact, working with one of our core customers in particular, it ended up being quite a big impact for them to help continue to work through all of this. Again, when people couldn't travel, they were still locked in homes. And it's not even that. The facilities themselves went through some interesting moments where they had lower staff, they had density restrictions, they weren't letting people on site. So how do you continue to work on all of this when you can't physically be there anymore? And that was the big shift that I think, again, it's not even just my team, my customers had to invent ways to deploy all this software and get it up to speed from their own bedrooms too. My customers were the ones that innovated to hell on how you then deploy this brand new technology, brand new devices, brand new approaches that they've never done before, by the way, and had to figure it out again from their bedrooms. And so it's one of these wild things that no one will ever talk about, the IT teams that went above and beyond the call of duty during the pandemic to then serve the folks in manufacturing, using a lot of this new technology. And it's just really incredible. We saw what I got to see. I had a front row seat to how, this industry reacted in the way they did to service, the billions of people on planet Earth through this pandemic.
Right. And so the funding, how are you leveraging that? So that's amazing and really extraordinary. How are you deploying that money? You've obviously revamped the software, built your team. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So one of the big things we learned through the last 18 to 20, 24 months about this manufacturing system, this MES, we started to realize that even though that's the most core fundamental piece of software that these organizations have, the one that controls their drug making process, we started to recognize that there's a lot of other 3-letter acronym systems too that are required to help get a drug to market. There's like 11 of them for the record, 11 three-letter acronyms. And what we learned was that the MES, like I said, is at its core, but there's other systems like the LES, the laboratory execution system, which is for not drug discovery or research, but for quality control teams. So you make the drug in the MES, you got to test the drug in the LES to make sure you don't kill anybody, right? Like that's bad. But the point is that market too, in our opinion, needed a new and modern system to, in and of itself, help deal with a lot of the challenges that are all around batch release, because you have to make sure that the batch was manufactured correctly. Also have to make sure it's safe, because that's bad too. You gotta make sure it's safe. So we built out already a second product line, even though we're still somewhat young-ish company all these years later. We now have our second product line we built and launched, our laboratory execution system. And now we're building our third product line right now already to specifically help decrease the time to market for new therapeutics. It's called the new product introduction cycle. It's a new product. Got to introduce it, kind of makes a lot of sense. But we're building out a lot of capabilities around this. It's not fully public yet, but we're using this new capital to not only grow the team, but to invest in these new areas, because the outcome of all this is something what we're calling now the Tempo Manufacturing Cloud. It's one platform to turn molecules into medicine. Kind of a nice really phrase. And again, thank you my team for putting this together. But the takeaway is that we're using this capital to really invest deeply in simplifying, organizing, and streamlining the systems that are required to bring a new drug to market. Because our thesis, our whole belief here is that these new biotechs coming to market have also raised a lot of money, $50 billion worth in the last 2 years, by the way. And their IT teams are quite small. They have like 5 people, maybe 10 if they're lucky. And they don't have a lot of the resourcing to deploy all these big complex systems. And it slows the process down to get that drug to market. So we believe we can simplify all of this in one platform now. And that's what we're investing deeply, deeply in. In addition to that, we're scaling out our go-to-market team. So my sales team is literally 10 times the size as it was last year. And so that team has gotten to be quite big. And the exciting thing about that is that For the long time, it was only a few people that were leading our go-to-market efforts. And now we have a much larger and very skilled and very experienced team to help us continue to build and work in those go-to-market muscle to help us scale the organization. So it's interesting. It's like, where is our focus changing? It's changing from initial product market fit, helping to get our customers up in line and getting them to realize value. So now moving into a scale journey, scaling the product with multiple product lines, scaling the team with go-to-market, scaling how we then do this geographically, not just in the United States anymore. So there's a lot of interesting things that this capital is going towards, but the mission, the thesis, the purpose, all of that is the same. Now it's just a matter of using the capital wisely to have a big impact on this space.
Is there any vision to go outside life sciences or pharma in the future?
Good question. I think if people are listening in, they can tell that I'm quite an ambitious person. That's all I'll say right now.
Great. And who are you? Who do you see as your competitors?
Yeah. So what's really interesting about this space is that, number one, the biggest predominant competitor that we see is paper. Paper's our enemy. Paper is still close to 70 to 80% of this space. And it's something that working through and working around the cultural changes to move them off of paper and into digital is a real challenge. And in a way, it's a competitor, because paper is quite good at a lot of different things. You can browse, it's flexible, it doesn't require training, it's easy to make modifications to. It's actually quite a tough competitor, I have to say. But the takeaway is that we've had to build in tooling to make it easier to move paper-based documents into a digital system, but to decrease the cultural impact, the cultural burden, the shock to the system of moving from paper to digital. And so we had to actually invest a lot of our software into this problem. But besides paper, there are a number of competitors, the legacy solutions in space that I deeply respect, because I've come to recognize and have an appreciation for how grossly complicated life science and life science manufacturing actually is. And so those legacy systems have been around for quite a long time. But I just think that there's an evolution and cycling to technology. And we just happen to be, the next generation of all of this. And so there's folks like Virum and Syncade and Rockwell and others that have come before us and blazed a trail for us. And so now it's, in my opinion, our responsibility to kind of take that torch and be the next generation of how therapeutics are manufactured and designed. Right.
I have to ask, and you don't have to answer it, but it seems to me as though this technology could be used for people who are doing surgery, right? They all talk about the benefits of virtual reality and having guidance for folks afar, particularly in developing worlds. Probably, what's your perspective on that in general?
So, well, I can't comment yet on what other verticals we can go into. What I can comment on is my belief on where I see the future of human work going. It actually comes back to this shoulder, the name of the company. There it is, Apprentice. Because I have this belief that the nature of human work is changing, and humans are moving from a lot of what's called like deterministic labor, like repetitive things over and over and over again, to probabilistic labor, where a man needs to humans need to work with some intelligent machine to get an outcome that neither the human nor machine alone can do. And you're starting to see a lot of these patterns emerge with AI in all different types of industries, from legal to accounting to things like this. And I just fundamentally believe that in the future, it's not going to be a dystopian world where no one has jobs and it's a bunch of robots doing everything. I don't believe that. I just believe that the nature of human work is changing. And I believe that humans need to augment themselves with some type of apprentice, get it? To be able to then create an outcome that an unassisted human couldn't do themselves. So I unequivocally, fundamentally believe to my bones that this type of technology, this type of approach, these types of innovations can unequivocally be used in areas like surgery, in areas where training isn't as high and they need to augment their skill set with some type of tool set. And I really just fundamentally believe that there will be a change, but not a shock. Like I just don't believe that humans won't have jobs. It doesn't make sense to me. I just believe that the job will be different. It's just gonna be different. They're gonna have to leverage technology because the computer is only gonna be so smart, and that you still need a creative, thoughtful, empathetic human to be able to make a decision that the machine just can't do. So there's a big road ahead for all this stuff, and I think that we're only in the early innings of what I believe at least, to be a change in how humans do things.
Right. Well, that's really exciting. We've covered so much. This has been great. And if anyone has questions, please submit them. What about partnerships? You mentioned before you built trust. Talk to us about some of those, some of the things you've learned about partnerships and partnering and what's going on with the industry.
Absolutely. So I break partners into two groups: my own customers, which unequivocally they are a group of partners, because I'll get into the whole piece around it. And then we also leverage a lot of partners to help our customers have the appropriate data to make the right decisions to release the batch to patients, which I'll get to shortly. But the fundamental core component of all of this is trust. And trust is a really interesting thing because, in software land nowadays, it's always about like, well, how do you deploy at scale with higher volume and do so in a way where the customer just logs in and just magically does their thing. And what we found is that, especially because of what our software is used for, making drugs for human beings, trust is at its fundamental root in order to have our customers feel comfortable to use a technology, a piece of software in their environment. And so we spend a lot of time, an entire customer success team that runs the gamut of customer success motions, from learning and development. We have a whole training program built and designed around helping our customers feel empowered with the system, to then our customer success team who's helping to evangelize this and get our customers up to speed, to our deployment team who acts as kind of like a consultancy on how best to use the software, and then support, as we've seen throughout the industry, is becoming so critical to helping evangelize your customer, because the better that you can help them be successful through your software, the better they're ultimately going to be off. And all of that, what we call the customer trust journey, that whole end-to-end cycle, is just fundamental. And so through that customer trust journey, it creates a partnership with our customers, because have we built out every single component of the system that we need to? No, but it does allow us to then be able to have the capability to receive their feedback and build it into our software going forward. And so that relationship, which again it sounds obvious, but in software nowadays, the words like relationships and deployment and customer trust is not always often talked about, because it's all about growth, scale, volume, go. And to me, there's still human beings doing human things, and maintaining that relationship and that trust has then translated into very high growth. And so there's a metric called net retention. It's a barometer for how well you retain your customers, and they buy more and more of your software. And we hit the highest number during the pandemic that Insight Partners, one of our investors, has ever seen. And it was like 500 and something percent. It was insane, because our customers trusted us to then deploy and expand and grow our software base within their organizations. And that feeds through into partnerships of all kinds. We have partners that help us validate our software. One of our most trusted relationships and partnerships is with a company to help validate our software on behalf of our customers, because we go through a lot of regulatory hurdles and challenges within our space. We have software partnerships that have helped augment our capability for quality capabilities, like Viva Systems and others who give us the data that we need to release these batches. And those partnerships, those relationships, have ultimately helped us in our product scale faster and provide value faster for our shared customers. It's all like, it's weird to say, but like a lot of people don't internalize how much relationship and trust is fundamental to this game.
Yeah, no, I think that comes through loud and clear, Angelo. Before we get to questions, tell us one tip that has been the key to your success and should be the key to the success of other leaders, as they scale their companies.
So one of the biggest learnings that I've had in the last 18 to 20 months, going from, less than 20 people to now 200 as fast as we did, is that in order to maintain the same level of velocity that you have when you're nimble, right? When you're small, super small and nimble, I can talk to everyone can talk to me, we can all be on the same page and go really fast. What we found is that when you start building up and creating layers within the organization, which are unbelievably necessary, alignment is fundamental to the success and health of the organization. Because if you can align a team and provide clarity on what the goal is, what you're working on, what the timeline expectations are, and who is working on what across the company. I have kind of a fanatical religion. Truly, it's a religion when it comes to OKRs. I know a lot of people talk about them, but I take it to the extreme where even my note taking at night when I'm in bed follows an OKR pattern. I kid you not, it's pretty unhealthy. But the point is, I believe that through OKRs, it creates alignment, which thereby creates clarity for my team, which then helps facilitate decision velocity so that my team can be more empowered to make their best decisions to ultimately help the organization go faster. There's simple examples of this where it's hey, our OKR is X millions of dollars for our marketing pipeline. It's one of our objectives. The key results to help build it there are all built around, say, different channels, demand gen, events, partnerships, et cetera. But then my team then knows exactly what they need to do and the time they need to do it in and what the expected results are. And then they can weekly track and measure against it to know whether we're on track or off track. And if we're off track, that's okay. We created an environment where it's okay to be off track as long as you predict that we're going off track, come up with a new plan to get back on track, and communicate it early and often throughout the organization so that if we simply aren't going to make it, we have to adjust some other lever in the business to ensure that the business can be successful. So even though it takes a lot of time, even though it feels like you're repeating yourself till you're blue in the face, even though sometimes it can be hella annoying, creating alignment is fundamental to growth because it creates clarity and thereby decision making, which for me, this is just, N of one over here. But for me, I've seen it's been incredibly helpful to get the business to where it needs to go. And we've seen it in the results. We've hit plan now for almost 2 years straight. I've grown my team really quickly and our retention numbers are extremely high for people that choose to voluntarily stay here at Apprentice. And it's something that, I'm proud of, not only my team, but all the leaders I have in the organization who spend so much time working on the business, not just in the business. But yeah, that's my advice. Align, clarify, and it'll help you go real fast.
No, that makes a lot of sense and easier said than done, I'm sure. But now, when did you implement the OKRs? Just curious.
So I started working with a CEO coach. His name's Kirk Dando. My gosh, almost 4 years ago now, right after we got funded for the first time. Because after we got funded for the first time, I raised my hand and I said, I don't know what I don't know. I just don't. And I wanted someone to help me peek around the corner and help me predict what was going to happen as best I could. So I started working with Kirk, who has been by far my biggest secret weapon because I've really adopted his religion. And so even though we were a very small company for the first maybe 2.5, 3 years of working together, we started to instill that process very early on. So when growth hit and growth finally came, it felt very natural to me what to do, what I needed to do. And the organization was able to adopt this. And then as we start to feed in people into the bottom of the organization, start to grow it, the system just naturally started to scale. So he's been fundamental, my gosh, to my success, because there's no way I would have been able to predict what I was going to run into without him helping guide me through all this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because the important is you're aware and cognizant and willing to learn. And that's a lot of young entrepreneurs, get off track because they think they know everything. And I think everyone's, whatever industry, a coach or an advisory board or both, preferably, can be really super helpful. as long as you have an open mind to accept their guidance and leverage it, right? Not all the time, perhaps, but at least be cognizant of that reality that you don't know everything, and you need help, especially when you're scaling. And it's one of the hardest thing. Entrepreneurship is the hardest thing, the hardest job to scale, like you've done, right? It's really the hardest job on the planet to do it successfully. So I give kudos to you. We have a question from Esther Certain, who's been, as you know, a great supporter
Oh my gosh,
the tech industry here. She said, how did you find your coach actually? Was it through the VC?
How I found them was through Silverton, my seed round investor. And they were the ones that helped me network to Kirk. And Kirk was pretty selective, but it's interesting. He picked me because, he was really selective about people, but he picked me because I had an open mind to be coached. I really fundamentally believe that you have to, unfortunately, have a bit of humility, very classic New Jersey humility, a little bit of humble, a little bit of self-deprecation, but damn, dear Lord, will you work your socks off to I just wanted to be coached. And so Kirk, I got introduced through our seed round investors, Silverton Partners, who've been exceptional all these years, by the way, too. Just that gets to the second part of advisory, where my board has been fundamental, absolutely fundamental to my success. I do not view my board as like combative investors who they're trying to, make some money off of me and blah, blah, blah. They've become partners. And by far, some of my most trusted relationships that I have, period, in my life are still on my board. Mike Dodd, Roger Chen, both these folks from Silverton have been exceptional for me. Combined with Kirk, combined with our new investors from Inside Alkion, Pritzker, and others, those types of folks that have watched a lot of game footage, right? They've seen a lot of games, and they can help me predict and peek around the corner as best as I can. I talk to them almost, sometimes on tough weeks, I talk to them almost daily, still, my board to this day, because they help me navigate some of these very complex challenges, whether it's not just growth and scale, but people become very difficult over time. And not to say that people are difficult, the process of people is difficult, and navigating all of that is I didn't learn it in a book, unfortunately. So
yeah, no, that's really great guidance, because as you know, it's very lonely at the top, and yes, you really need, whether you're a CEO of a small company or a large company, it's super lonely, and having those people you can lean on is really important, not only to the success of the company, but your sanity, especially during a pandemic.
Especially during a pandemic, like scaling this in my bedroom with which is now a 3-year-old, my daughter, it's 3, and my 1-year-old is 1. So also having 2 very young kids during the pandemic too, and manage all this and staying sane, trying to as best I can. Having a advisory board and coach around me was fundamental to the navigation of all of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this has been great. Thank you for your leadership and the time spent today. I appreciate you squeezing it into the schedule. Angelo, we typically close out with a saying or a poem. So you want to share something?
Yeah, my by far most favorite poem, phrasing, etc., is from Robert Frost. The best way out is through, because it's so hard, right? And you just don't have a choice sometimes. And going around it, giving up is just not a choice. You have to go through. And that has served me unbelievably well when it's been wildly complex, difficult things. And I wish I could share some of the insane stuff we've been through, even just here at Apprentice. You just don't have a choice. You just have to keep marching and push through. So that's by far my favorite quote from Robert Frost. There's a whole poem around it. It's quite sweet.
That's a great way to end. Thank you, Angelo. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.